We'll be starting in about 1 minute. And hello, welcome to Why Building a Successful Career is Like Building a Startup. This is a career masterclass from Simplilearn, and our guest today is T.N. Hari, the head of HR at BigBasket. More about him in a moment. First, how to participate in the webinar. Just quickly, the question mark button allows you to enter questions for our panelists. Today, Hari will be joined by Krishna Kumar, the founder and CEO of Simplilearn. And if you enter your questions, we will get to those at the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. You can also enter chat with the speech bubble and use all panelists to make sure that Krishna and Hari see the message. And we'll be taking some of those live during the presentation. And now to introduce T.N. Hari, the head of HR at BigBasket, who's also advisor to Arkham Ventures and Fundamentum, and an advisor and sounding board to numerous young entrepreneurs and startups, the co-founder of Infinite, with 18 years in high-tech startups after 14 years at Tata Steel, author of 4 books with 2 more coming soon. And welcome, Hari, and take it away, Krishna.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart. And thank you, Hari, for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on board. So, Hari, I'm sure a lot of attendees already know you. So I have a set of questions that I want to ask you. But before that, you wanted to talk about first your thoughts on this topic. So we'll start with that, and then I have some questions that I want to ask you. And then I'll also let the audience ask you the questions that they are willing. I'm sure they are waiting for the moment to ask you. So,
Great.
So look forward to hearing, Hari.
Great. Thank you, Krishna. So I think what I will do is maybe I will just share some of my own thoughts, and then we can follow it up with Q&A. So the topic is really I picked is building a career is like building a successful startup. And when faced with the challenge of explaining an idea that is inherently difficult to comprehend, a very powerful approach is to use an analogy from a different context that is more easily comprehensible, and then use that understanding to create clarity around the original idea. And storytellers, marketeers have used this for centuries. So I am using the same tool, which is storytelling, from a different context, which is how do you build your startups and then see the parallels to building your career. So I think, the first thing I would say about building a great startup is that you need to build good habits in good times. And I think a lot of startups, what they try to do is when bad times hit them, they try and develop good habits. So I think good habits are difficult to build in difficult times. Good habits need to be built in good times. And good habits could be about, running a frugal business, building the startup sustainably, crazily focusing on customers so that, they are loyal to you in all the times. crazily focused on employees, building a nice culture. So these are all good habits that startups need to build in good times itself, not wait for the bad times to do this. And similarly, individuals also need to develop certain good habits, I would say, which will go on to hold them, stand by them in difficult times. And the first habit is just being very professional. And professional can just mean, responding to emails on time, returning calls, saying good things about others when needed, not hesitating to say, I don't know, giving credit to others when it is due, being truthful, trying to meet commitments, responsibility, being curious, learning all the time, upskilling continuously to the extent possible, associating with good people, associating with good organizations. These are all good habits. And I think many of them, are can be cultivated. Some of them are inherent. Some people inherently tend to be more curious than the others. Some people tend to inherently, learn more than the others. But I think with some practice, all of us can cultivate how to be a little more professional, little more curious, little more, learning oriented, constantly upskilling, trying to associate with good people. And I think these are some things that you can cultivate and very, very important, I would say, in terms of building a career. I also, am fascinated by, concept of saying no to jugaad, which is, saying no to jugaad in building your startup and saying no to jugaad in terms of building your career as well. And saying no to jugaad is about, taking shortcuts. Shortcuts is jugaad. Jugaad is not frugal innovation. A lot of people seem to think that jugaad is frugal innovation. If you see it that way, there's nothing wrong, because frugal innovation is very critical for scaling your startup. But I think, jugaad is more about taking shortcuts and making shortcuts as a practice. And inherently, what happens is that in the short term, it might give you some benefits, but eventually in the long term, it comes to bite back in a very big way. Let me just give you a very simple example. So every company, for instance, has a policy against harassment. Specifically, let's say it's prevention of sexual harassment. Now, what happens when your top salesperson, who brings in 20 to 30% of your revenue and is responsible for growth, is accused of harassment, and on investigation you find that whatever is has been accused is right? What do? Do you, backtrack? Do you, drag your feet? You don't take action, or do you take swift action? So I think if you drag your feet, maybe you will get some short-term benefits because he's bringing in the deals, but eventually it will create such a bad reputation for the firm that good people will not want to join you. Half the workforce, which is women, will not see your organization or your startup as a safe place to work, as a good place to work. And even people within your organization may not be happy with your approach. So I think this holds true for careers as well. I think the kind of jobs that you pick, the kind of role changes that you seek, the kind of changes in organizations that you seek should be for a bigger purpose, for a bigger cause. As long as you make these switches for short-term benefits, for slight increase in cash, for a promotion, for a designation, I think they will come to harm you in a big way. So I think it's important to, pick your career based on your anchors, based on your strengths, make the right changes for the right reasons, whether within the company or outside the company. I think that's relevant. I'll now just switch to a slightly different concept, which is, Marshall Goldsmith saying, all of us have heard this, which is, what got you here won't get you there. And the counter to this is that if you forget what got you here, you will never get anywhere. And both of these, I'll tell you, are important. And the first, let me come to the second one because it's more fundamental. If you forget what got you here, you will never get anywhere, which means that you need to stay grounded. All of us learn lessons in life. We go through some difficult experiences. And then I know when somebody else, who is more popular, more influential, tells us something which is counter to that, we are quick in changing our opinion. I think it's important to remember our lessons well and stay grounded and not just be carried away by the latest fad. That's about being grounded and remembering your lessons and remembering where you come from. The other part, which he himself has said, which is that what got you here won't get you there, which is that you need to learn new skills constantly and you need to learn new things. What got you to become a great individual contributor may not take you to being a great people manager, may not take you to being a great CXO. So you need to add on new skills. So I think that side, both of them are critical. It's important to be grounded. It's important to also have your wings and fly. I think Walter Mischel was the person who wrote this famous book called The Marshmallow Test. And he had conducted an experiment. He's an Austrian American psychiatrist, psychologist, who had conducted an experiment that lasted maybe a couple of decades. He took a bunch of young children and conducted a test, which is he told them, you know what, you can take a marshmallow today, or if you're willing to, say no today, I'll give you 2 marshmallows 1 week from now. So he was basically checking for the ability to defer gratification. And then what he did was he followed these bunch of children in their career later on, and as they evolved into adults. And he found a very strong, beautiful correlation, which is that those who were able to defer gratification were the individuals who tended to be a little more successful in life. And therefore, he concludes that book by saying the biggest secret of an ultimately happy life is the development of self control. So, in some ways, I think it's important to develop this degree of self control, defer gratification, because a lot of things, good things happen if you can defer gratification. Gratification for money, gratification for position. If you focus on getting the knowledge, focus on learning new things, then I think they will get you the long term benefits. I'll also talk a little bit about, phase changes that startups go through and phase changes that, individuals and career go through. So, for example, there is a very famous model by Larry Grainer. He wrote this in a Harvard Business Review article. He said typically startups go through 5 phases of evolution, from being a very early stage startup to being a mature firm. And he beautifully identifies what these different phases are. I've been with startups for 18 years, and in the beginning, I tended to figure out that there is something that is changing in the startup that I am working. I could not clearly figure out, but I sensed that something is changing. And as I read his article, it was a big aha moment for me. Everything fell into place and the penny dropped. He says the first stage of growth is growth through direction, which is the founder has a brilliant idea, and growth happens because of the idea itself. So it is the idea which results in growth, nothing else. You have a disruptive idea, customers love it, are willing to pay for it. The founder does not need anything else, and the startup will go up to a particular point. But beyond that point, if the startup is to progress, then the founder needs to learn basics of management, which is how to hire a tech organization, how to hire my tech team, how to conduct interviews, how to give feedback, how to do basics of marketing, how to do frugal marketing, how to keep my books of account. So unless the founder begins to learn of these things, the startup begins to break. So the founder learns all of these things, and then the next phase of growth is the founder telling everybody else, this is the way we do things here, which is growth through direction, telling everyone, this is how we market, this is how we hire our tech folks, this is the way we conduct interviews. But the startup again struggles because good people are not willing to join the startup because the founder is telling everyone what to do, whereas good people want to come in and do what they know best. So the founder bridges this and goes beyond it. Then the founder begins to delegate, which is give freedom to people, empower them, and then growth happens because of delegation. But when growth happens because of delegation, then what happens is that small little empires begin to get built. Small different subcultures begin to get built because you hire people, leaders from different organizations. They come from different backgrounds. They have seen different success stories, different contexts, and each of them believes that their experience is the best experience. So delegation after some point results in chaos. Resources are not shared. People build their own independent organizations, as a result of which, cost structures begin to go up. At that point of time, if the founder understands this and gets to the next level, the founder begins to bring everyone together through good coordination, which is putting the right kind of dashboards together, which is, getting people to share resources, sharing information, sharing, one another's goals with the team as such. So this results in very good coordination, but it also creates a bit of bureaucracy, which is essential at this point of time. Because if that's not there, then the organization will just break apart because of centrifugal forces. So it creates some bureaucracy, but it keeps the organization together. But at the next phase is about collaboration. How do you create people to work in teams and innovate well without the bureaucracy. That happens when the organization begins to collaborate in a very informal way. So I've seen these phases very clearly in the organization that I've worked for, but it was an intuitive understanding. And when I read this article, everything fell into place. And you can see some parallels in careers as well, which is all of us start, by being dependent. All of us start by being individual contributors. All of us start, by applying whatever little knowledge we have to the work we do. The next phase of our growth is independence. How do you be professional? How do you take decisions on your own? How do you not ask for guidance too much? How do you ask for guidance for the right amount, neither too little nor too much? How do you escalate at the right time, neither too late nor too early? So it is from dependence to independence you get. And finally, to progress in your career, you need to understand that independence is not enough. You need to get to interdependence. How do you work in a network? How do you influence people who are not part of your team? How do you influence people, to believe in your ideas? How do you sell ideas? How do you collaborate on complex issues and build unanimity? How do you create, a coalition of support for your ideas? So that's about interdependence. The career is also about developing these skills from being dependent, being very professional, applying knowledge to work. And then it's about independence, which is applying a lot more knowledge across functions, across teams, delegating, providing guidance. And then it's finally about interdependence, which is about influencing in a very big way. So I think this is an analogy as well, interesting one. The next one I would like to provide is that startups always invariably tend to make some pivots at the right point of time. So those who've been with startups figure out, what is a pivot. It comes from basketball, actually. In basketball, pivot is, you keep one foot firmly on the ground and swivel around that foot, move the second foot in the air so that you are able to pass or take a shot by avoiding a defender. And the same thing applies in a startup as well. And there's so many cases of pivots that have happened. Every single company that you think of, including your own startup, you must have done multiple pivots. The companies I work for made multiple pivots. Make My Trip, which many of you would recognize, made a big pivot from just being, airlines, bookings, travel company, to doing hotels. They realized that airlines is not going to give them margins because their bargaining power was not high, because the number of airlines was very few, and therefore their bargaining power was not high. But hotels was completely disaggregated, and therefore there was an opportunity to, bring them on this platform. So every startup, figures out that you need to make a pivot at some point of time if things are not going well. And a pivot is about staying, on one core competence, one core ability, one core customer segment, keeping that constant, making changes in a few other things. And that could be about, addressing adjacent customers, providing a slightly different service. It could mean any of those things. And pivots happen in your career as well. I made multiple pivots. I was a hardcore engineer, mechanical engineer, working on the shop floor with a hard hat in a steel company, pivoted to HR within a steel company, working with trade unions, and more than HR, it was really working with trade unions, and then pivoting to HR in startups. So I think all of us make these pivots. So one anchor is very important, and therefore you need to figure out what is your anchor. Sometimes you might wonder, what is my anchor? Is it easy to figure out what my anchors are? I think if you think very honestly, it's easy to figure out what your anchors are. There are always those signals. So, for example, one anchor could be whatever has given you success in life. And success in life could be in your student days, college days, in your early career. What has given you success? Are you successful because you're a great communicator? Are you successful because you are a terrific thinker, clear thinker? Or are you successful because you execute really well? So if you think very deeply, you will figure out that there are some anchors that have resulted in your success. And those are important to remember because you should always try and stay with some of those. Other ways to figure out, for instance, what is your anchor is if you are in the midst of an activity and if you lose a sense of time, and after that activity is over, you feel like doing it again, and you're waiting for the next opportunity to do that again, then that's clearly your anchor. For example, if I'm in a problem solving session, whiteboarding session, and that can be about any type of a problem, I lose sense of time. And therefore, at the end of the session, I'm always waiting for when is the next problem solving opportunity. So clearly for me, one of my anchors is problem solving. So if you think about this, what has given you success? By doing what you are not able to figure out, the time is passing. What are those activities you volunteer for and want to do again and again? If you figure that out, you'll figure out your anchors. And therefore, it's important to keep that anchor very steady. There are a few people, of course, who are able to make dramatic switches in career. Some people are able to, move from operations to quality assurance. But some people are able to move from operations to marketing to general management, are able to make those dramatically different, unrelated moves. So those people possess very high degree of clear thinking, common sense, and an ability to deal with people. Some people just make career changes which are adjacent, which is that from analytics to digital marketing, or digital marketing to data sciences. They make those related switches where there is some core competence deep within, which is about data, which is about numbers, but they're able to make some switches to adjacent domains. But some people make switches to very, very unrelated domains. So you need to figure out and what kind of switches you are capable of making, I think. And you should be honest about that, because if you're not honest, then you will end up doing the wrong things. You will end up pursuing things for which you are not competent. You will not have self-awareness. And you know what people say, individuals have got burnt out. They get burnt out in startups. I will tell you that burnout never happens if you are enjoying what you're doing. Burnout only happens if you're doing something that you don't enjoy day in and day out. Every day, if you're doing something that you are not enjoying, you will burn out in no time. So, for example, if you give me a sales job, a job that requires to go out and sell to people, I will burn out in no time, because that's not my skill. And I will acknowledge that upfront. Always I've acknowledged it. I've never taken anything that's got to do with selling. So I think it's however well it pays, however cool it may be, however easy it may be to get to a CEO through the sales and marketing route. If you're not fit to do that, don't do it, because you will then burn out. So I think it's important to find your anchors, find what you like, find what you are good at, and then pursue that. And you know what? The last couple of points I'll make. Warren Buffett, had said that in investing, when others are greedy, that's when you should, not be greedy. Which is that if others are, stock markets are going up crazily, you should be selling. If the stock markets are falling crazily, that's when probably you should be buying. Which is contrarian behavior is good. So I would say in a career, it really means that not necessarily going with the crowd. So I think going with the crowd, going with the herd is deeply ingrained into the human brain. It has almost become part of evolution. There's so much of evolutionary muscle behind it. Following the crowd, becomes the norm. It happened, it happens in business schools. It happens in schools where everybody wants to do engineering because their friends are doing engineering. And I found so many people after one semester figure out that engineering is not their cup of tea at all. They figure out marketing was not their cup of tea. They took electives unnecessarily. Some people figure out that they should have done this, but they didn't do it. So I think try and avoid going with the crowd. Try and avoid just chasing whatever is in fashion, and do whatever is the right thing by you. And the last point I'll make is that if you change jobs in a career, do that for the right reason, which is that ask yourself, will this help me learn new skills? Will this help me develop new competencies? Can I leverage my strengths and do something which will create impact on scale? So I think those are all the things that you should look for when you change your job, when you look for a new job. You shouldn't be looking at something because it pays you more. And you know what? I've always seen that when I've done hiring for a living for several years, and when I look at a resume, and if I see that people have spent 1.5 years in roles, it gives me it's a big red flag for me, because it almost tells me that they're changing jobs for the wrong reason, or that they have been identified as not performing, which means that it took 2 years for you to be discovered that you are not a performer, and then you ran away before you got discovered. So I think it's important to stay in a place. Warren Buffett said, what, hold on. Long-term investing is what matters, because you need to hold on to stocks. Don't sell at the slightest dip. Don't get worried when stock markets fall if your fundamentals are correct, if the stocks that you invested have sound fundamentals, because stock markets will go up eventually. Good, right stocks will go up. The same thing about your career as well. Make the right investments, hold on to them for sufficient period of time, because it takes sufficient amount of time to build deep capabilities. Deep capabilities don't come very easily. You need to be at it. You need to work hard. You need to, dirty your hands. You need to roll up your sleeves. You need to get some stuff done. And one of the other things that I keep hearing from time to time, even in startups, is that, what this job is not giving me anything exciting. It's not adding to my CV. It is not strategic. I'm doing tactical stuff every day. I'm doing boring stuff. And how will it help me in my career? So real thing is that, there's nothing like strategy. Strategy is always learned in the context of execution. I can give you so many examples. I think I'll give you one simple example that I just encountered. In one of the companies that I was working for, we were small at some point of time. And in 2015, this was a 3-city company. This is BigBasket. And there was not much of travel involved. And we had a very small travel desk manned by one individual. And then suddenly we decided to expand into 25 cities, tier 2 cities. And then suddenly travel increased dramatically. We had to open new offices, get new warehouses, hire new people, get new teams, interviews. So travel increased dramatically. And then suddenly we found out that Make My Trip, Yatra, all the travel companies refused to provide us services. Whenever some people used to travel to a tier 2 city in India, Vijayawada, Visakhapatnam, Chandigarh, they would find in the middle of the night that the hotel tells them no room is being booked for you. The cab would not turn up. We figured out we had not paid the invoices. And then the travel executive walked away. And then we opened the desk of the travel executive. We found piles and piles of invoices. And then we called one lady and told her, you know what, we know you have a day job to do. Can you fix this? Because this is a very important thing for the company. Her response was, you know what, this is shit that somebody else has created. Why should I clean it up? And how will it add to my CV? What is it strategic in this? And by the way, if I do this, will you give me a special bonus? Then we called a second lady, and her response was, you know what? Tell me how much time do you give me? And we said, you have a week's time. Do I have any resources for this? Sorry, we said we don't have any. If you want, you can hire an intern. She got an intern and fixed this problem in 7 days. Did she do strategic stuff? Absolutely, she did strategic stuff. Because looking at those hundreds of thousands of invoices, she had to take some decisions because there was no evidence that a person had actually traveled and utilized that service which was being invoiced. So she had to look at some data which was incomplete and take some decisions, get management approval, and put in place processes that would ensure that such a thing would never happen again. So therefore, in the context of this dirty work, she figured out some strategic stuff. So such things are very important. So, the attitude is very critical, which is that you learn strategy, you learn the good stuff only in the context of execution. And I'll just talk about one last thing before we can open it up. I think this last thing is in a startup, people suddenly get exposed because the competency required in a job increases much faster than an individual can build a competency, because the ability for an individual to grow in capability is something. But if the startup grows much faster than that and the demand it places on the individual is much more than what the individual can grow to provide, then this individual is going to fail on the job. So it is important to realize that there's nothing wrong with me failing. It's something that, is natural because the organization has grown so rapidly. So in such a situation, what happens in startups is that some people suddenly find themselves out of debts. So for example, a startup might hire a head of operations. But when suddenly the operations grow, the product market fit is terrific, and the company begins to expand very rapidly, this individual may be out of debts. In which case, there the company may choose to bring in a VP operations who has handled scale before. Then how does this original head of operations deal with this? How does the startup deal with this individual? So I think a sensible individual will always figure out that, it's not the right thing for me to continue to do this because it's not a downgradation. The company getting a VP is not a downgradation for me. In fact, it's an opportunity for me to learn how to handle operations on scale under guidance. In fact, it gives me, a safety net. I am not going to fail. And therefore, it places me in a position of strength. A wrong way of thinking about this could be that, the company does not trust me anymore. And therefore, they've gotten somebody. I used to talk to the founder every day. Now I no longer can talk to the founder every day. I don't meet the founder every day. So I think, taking the right attitude in some kind of situation like this is very helpful. But some individuals still don't understand it and may choose to move on. But in your career, I think self-realization, self-awareness, awareness of what you're good at, awareness of what you're not good at, awareness of at what point of time you should give way to somebody else, at what point of time you should continue and persevere. They are all important lessons. So, as I said, that there are a lot of parallels between startups, parallels between good investing, and parallels with career building. So, let me pause here at this point of time. I think we've been 30 minutes, and then I think we can take questions.
So, Hari, I think that was very terrific speech. I think I learned a lot during this process, and it was a lot of wisdom. And I also reading out a lot of comments, and I think a lot of people were really writing a lot of things that I wish their managers were listening to this. And some of the people also said that this sounds like a great speech, and they want to listen more and more of this. So definitely, there's a lot of audience who enjoyed listening to you. And I wanted to ask you a few questions, and I'll take up some of those questions from the audience. Some of the questions that I had listed you have already covered, but I'll again touch base those questions with some kind of twist. So first thing that I want to ask you is that you went to IIT, you did mechanical engineering, then you went to IIM also, and then you become HR professional. I think this is a very unusual combination. During your time, I think HR was definitely not a top profession that anyone used to aspire to, especially the kind of HR that you started, like dealing with trade union. That appears to be a very dangerous thing to do. So, how did you realize that this is your calling or this is your anchor, and you decided to move from shop floor to dealing with trade unions and so-called? I think it could be called something else, right? It was not called HR, right? It was called something else, right?
Industrial relations.
Industrial relations. So how did you decide to get into that?
That's a good point, Krishna. So I think one of my anchors has been curiosity. So I think, I was interested in school days in physics, and that took me to engineering. At the same time, I was also interested in things like literature, history, and I continued my interest in history. And even today, I think when I write books, I've been writing some books, and I've been able to draw a lot from history. So, I did my MBA not to get a foothold outside of engineering, but to get a more holistic understanding of how organizations work. And therefore, I wanted to take up an engineering job after I left IIM. So I took up a job at Tata Steel. I didn't join international trade, which entailed a lot of foreign travel. I took up a job on the shop floor working in coke ovens, built one of the first, byproduct plants for treating coke oven gas. I enjoyed it a great deal. At some point of time in large companies, they also rotate you. As I told you, they rotate people sometimes if you're high potential into unrelated areas. And this happens in many large companies, including companies like IBM. If you're a high potential, they tend to rotate you into unrelated areas so that you can become a general manager. And therefore, one of the areas that I picked was HR because I liked the VP HR. And I found him a very interesting person, very high quality person who was very empowering in his style, very delegating in his style, very warm in his style. So I liked the person, and therefore I took up this role because of that. I could have gone into marketing, but marketing is not my calling. So I wanted to explore something else, and I wanted to explore HR because of this individual. And then I realized that, human capital is actually a very interesting area. It is for many reasons, people don't fully understand it. And I realize why they don't understand it. That's because human capital is not a specialized area like engineering or law. And therefore, you don't need to study HR to be able to work in HR. And I have found that the best HR people are those who come from other functions, not those people who've studied HR, formally done an MBA in HR, because those people typically lack, real, grounding in business. So I realized that, human capital is a very interesting area if you bring the right perspective. If you bring an understanding of business, it's a very exciting field. And then I also realized that Tata Steel somehow was not the place for me because I was a bit of a rule breaker. I was more of, an entrepreneur within the company. And I realized a large company tends to be bureaucratic. You need to take approval from 10 people before doing something. So I was looking out. It was just by accident that I joined this company called Daksh. So sometimes, what, in a career, I would also say that you just need to get a little lucky. If I hadn't got lucky, I would be languishing at Tata Steel. So I think, sometimes you need to get a little lucky. And that was my element of luck. And to tell you a story of luck, I kept trying. Never gave up. I never gave up looking out. And I just got lucky to meet the right organization. And for me, after that, it's been no turning back.
So I think, Hari, great point. So first, I'll also agree with you that in today's world, for sure, I think if there is something which is after CEO, if the CEO is the person who drives an organization to whichever direction he or she wants to drive, the next important role is HR, because in knowledge industry, your company is defined by the kind of people that you have on the board, and HR is a person that is overall responsible for getting the right kind of team members within the organization. So today is definitely that important, but great to know that you found that guy, the guy very charismatic, and he pulled you to that particular profession. Also, I agree that startups sometimes get lucky that they choose the right field, they choose the right technology, they go after the right opportunity. Because at every time you're always given up, you always have choice of multiple opportunity, and then you take a educated guess on I want to go after this and not go after the remaining opportunity. Sometimes you get lucky in selecting those opportunities, sometimes you fail miserably, right? So I think you need to have a little bit of luck. So completely agree to that point. Now, Hari, you have the distinction of working into three kinds of company. You have worked a really large company like Tata Steel. You have worked in at least two companies that I am aware of, Daksh, which became part of IBM, BigBasket that started small and became one of the largest company in that space in India. So startup that became quite big. And then you've also worked in a couple of startups that remain a startup and then acquired, like Taxi for Sure and so on. So if you have to give career advice to people who are in these three types of organization, startup that is still a startup that suddenly became big, and a company that is already very big, and there is an employee who is working in these three companies, and if they have to plan their career, if you're giving this advice to an individual working in these three types of companies, is your advice going to be different? How do you look at thinking? How do you see those employees thinking about their career? Like, for example, I saw one of the question asked by someone that I worked in a large company for 8 years, and I was taken for granted. I got a bigger salary hike. I was not recognized, and so on. Whereas there are other comments saying that why should I work for more than 2 years in an organization because I'm losing an opportunity. I can jump every 2 years, get into another company, get hiked, maybe get exposed to different kind of challenges also. So what is your advice depending upon who the person is and which kind of company is working?
Yeah. So frankly, Krishna, when I picked Daksh as well as BigBasket, they were small companies. They were not the companies that they are today. So, for example, in terms of valuation, though valuation may not be the perfect metric, it was less than $200 million when I joined BigBasket. Daksh was a 1,500 people organization when I joined. When I quit after about 4 years, it was about 25,000 people spread across multiple countries. So when I joined these companies, they were small. I think it just happened that these two became really big. Virtusa also became big. Virtusa was also a small company. We listed that company on NASDAQ. So that was also a success story. Whereas Taxi for Sure and Amba were relatively small. They got acquired. But I think I enjoyed my journey in all of these five. So my advice would to people would depend upon what kind of environment do you like. BigBasket currently is a large company. It's a stable environment. I think while there is innovation, it is not the small early stage startup kind of a situation. The chaos is not there. People have work life balance. People don't have to work for crazy hours. There is not so much of uncertainty. The business model is very steady. It is now about just being able to grow. Whereas in the early days, everything would have been chaotic. So if you love chaos, if you love thrive in chaos, if that's the kind of environment you love, then I think an early stage or rapidly growing startup is good. But if you want little more stability but don't want the bureaucracy of a very large company like an Accenture, then a BigBasket or a Daksh at its later stage is a good place to work. So I think a place like BigBasket provides you an opportunity to innovate. It is a semi startup and at the same time is not a large company. So I think it gives you stability and allows you to innovate. But if you really want to grow rapidly, then I think an early stage startup, because an early stage startup is always starving for talent. So if you are really good, then they begin to depend upon you. You can get promoted very rapidly. You can become if you're in product, if you demonstrate amazing abilities, you can even become a head of product. And if you can continue to scale your abilities along with the company scale, you could choose to continue to remain the head of product. They will not hire a VP above you because you are growing as rapidly as the startup itself. So I think it depends upon what you really like. Some people like good work-life balance. BigBasket is a good place to work if you want a good work-life balance. But the smaller ones maybe are chaotic. Making constant pivots, changing priorities every day. Today revenue growth, tomorrow profitability, laying off some people. So I think it depends upon the individual.
So, Hari, what about the large one? If someone is thinking about building their career and today happens to be in one of those large companies that you talked about, what will be your advice to them? Do you think that it's like practically impossible to build a great career in one of these large MNCs?
Oh, no, of course not. Of course not. So I think, no, frankly, I'm not implying that at all. So I think there are some people who are good in large companies. And, I've seen a lot of people who have joined large companies, continued to grow in large companies. Some of them have become CEOs. One of my batchmates, Narendran, is the current CEO of Tata Steel. He did well in a large company, thrived in a large company. It's just that I did not like working for a large company. But there are many people who are career IBMers. They will never quit IBM. They will reach, some of them will reach middle management level, some of them will reach senior management, some of them will become CXOs. But they are happy working in that kind of a company because it provides so many benefits. You can work from home. They will take you to different offices across IBM in the world. You can get global experience. You can get to work with global teams. You can work on building very impactful products. So it depends upon the individual. People are build very successful careers. Broadly, what intuitively I classify people as: is this person a large company individual or a small company person? Some people are inherently the large company people. And even after Daksh got acquired by IBM, I have found that some of them, even after 18 years, continue with IBM and they're thriving in IBM. So they were business heads, some of them in Daksh, but they continued. They didn't quit IBM, and they're doing very well. So I think you can build your career even in large companies. In fact, large companies are places where traditionally people have built careers. Startups are just relatively recent, I would say. I think large companies traditionally is where people thought they could build careers for the long term.
Got it. So I think, Hari, we're talking about large company and small company. So one of the bias that I have seen in the startup world, based on my experience, is that when the young companies or startups hire, they typically prefer hiring from another young company or so-called startup. They are little concerned when it comes to hiring from a like of an IBM, because I think that it will be a cultural misfit. And I think the same worries on the employee side also. People who work in large company, when they make switches, they make to another large company. Have you seen many successes where small company people have gone to a large company and they have done very well, and vice versa?
I have seen, yes, both examples I've seen, but not many. So I've seen, for example, I give you the example just some time back that people from Daksh, some of the business head, after acquisition by IBM, continued with IBM for 18 years, and still are with IBM and have made a big success of it. So from small company to large company, these are clear examples. And I have seen people from large companies to small companies. I myself have come from a large company to smaller companies, and I think I've been able to adjust and adapt reasonably well. And there are quite a few, I think, who've been able to adapt. But I think the problem or the mindset is quite genuine, because what happens is that sometimes when startups are on the verge of scaling and taking off in a big way, they think that by hiring people who have handled scale, they will be able to deal with scale. But that's not necessarily true. And I think there's a fine difference between managing in a scale environment in a large company and building for scale. The two are completely different. Managing in a scale environment means that there are a lot of support structures. You have people to do things for you. You might not have the ability to put pen to paper and get things yourself done. But it's important in a startup to be able to put pen to paper. How do you build for scale? You can't build for scale unless you can put pen to paper and develop the right processes yourself. Hire your team, do the interviews, and get things done. So I think I've seen some examples, where, and these are real examples. In one of the startups that I worked for, this was a KPO, knowledge process outsourcing company. We were going, global in a big way. The founders were selling, in the US and Europe to clients, but they did not know the sales process well enough. So we were thinking of getting a global head of sales. And we got a global head of sales eventually from a big company. And there were a lot of red flags in the hiring process. And none of us, objected. All of us, silently accepted it. None of us raised our fears, concerns about these red flags. A false consensus got built, and we hired this guy. In no time we had to let this person go. In less than 6 months we had to let this person go, because this guy just could not build for scale. The way he saw things, he could not deal with this chaos. So I think if you come from a large company, it's good, but you should be able to adjust with this chaotic workplace. You should be able to understand and work with the early stage employees who have built a reputation, who have solved real problems in the 0 to 1 stage. You should appreciate them, respect them, build mutual trust, demonstrate some skills that they don't have. Because if you don't demonstrate skills that they don't have and value, then they will be worrying, why has the company paid somebody so much to hire? So I think the fear that big company people can't adjust to small companies and vice versa is a genuine fear. So I think whenever you are hiring across, you should be extremely careful and do reference checks.
Got it. So I think, Hari, another question, which is also a little bit sensitive question, is that I also see a trend wherein when you are hiring, let's say somebody for a mid-manager role, and there are two options. Both are maybe equally good candidate. One candidate is less than, let's say, about 6 to 8 years of overall work experience, and then there's another candidate which is more like, say, 15 to 20 years of work experience. Invariably, most of the hiring managers, even though they might not say that officially, but they'll end up hiring the junior person, right? And this is also leading to a lot of people who have more number of years of experience, and for various reasons they have not got to the next level. They're losing out to the opportunity that they deserve based on their current skill set. So what kind of advice do you have people like? What kind of advice can you give it to them?
This is a very tough question, Krishna. In fact, this really brings us to another topic, which is diversity and inclusion. I think diversity and inclusion, we have taken things from a politically correct perspective. We always have tried to say politically correct things, but the reality is that there is some discrimination which happens based on age and based on education. So, job description would say, you need an engineer, you need so and so. But you will find some people who may not have the educational qualifications who are also very good. But what happens is that you have to cast your net very wide, and therefore you specify. Similarly, it comes to age also. I think, for example, take a founder who is, let's say, 28 years old. The founder is unlikely to hire a 45-year-old person to work as a direct report. So, for example, as a CTO or a chief product officer, somebody who's 45 years old, the 20-year-old, 8-year-old founder would be reluctant. The founder might even think, what, that if 45-year-old guy may be good, but why should I spend so much time adjusting? Why should I deal with that risk of whether it will fail or not fail? Will we, be able to think alike? Will he be able to work as fast as I work? Will this person be able to cope? Will this be able to attend late night meetings because we are a chaotic workplace? So I think some of the fears, I think, tend to be a little genuine, but sometimes also I think hiring managers are a bit insecure. So I think there is a fine balance. Part of it is insecurity, which is that if I hire a 7-year experienced person, that person will be easier to manage because that person has not seen many things in life. So that person will be willing to listen to me. Whereas somebody who's 15 years old will have a point of view, will say no, will argue, will have a contrarian view. So why should I go through all those difficulties? So I think it's partly the insecurity. So I think partly it is genuine, partly I think it is a fear of, can I manage this experienced person? I think the reality is that India is a demographically young nation, and I think a lot of talent from the youth, younger, is pushing, and therefore, unless the 15-year-old is constantly learning new skills which the 7-year experience does not have, and which is, I can tell you, very difficult, because just by getting more years of experience does not mean that your competence is building up. Unless you are thinking, unless you're curious, unless you're learning, your competence will not be really very different from a 7-year experienced person, excepting for some areas in maturity, other things you may not be more competent. So I think you need to, that 15-year experienced person should constantly learn, otherwise they will really become redundant.
So I think great point, Hari, and I think so. Your message is that if you are, as your experience increases, you need to continuously upskill, reskill, and make sure that you deserve that job. Otherwise, youngsters will push you away. You told about that India is a young demography and the more talent coming into the job force every year. Unfortunately, I have seen that in US also. If you go to a Google or a Facebook campus, it looks like a grad school. So
Yeah.
such a big one. You think that you are in a campus, right? Because most of the kids working there are in their early 20s. Oh, Hari, I wanted to ask you a question that you had touched upon while we were speaking, which was that a person has joined a young company and was doing extremely well. Suddenly, the workload increases to a company grows 10x, and the founder realizes that the person who was doing very well till date is not good enough for this increased skill, and he gets someone from outside.
Yeah.
Now, two things happens. There are few people who stick on and they look forward to learning from the new person that has come to take up his role. And there are people who think that okay, I was doing great. For no reason, I have been asked to report to someone else. Now, the other option that I have seen a lot of these people do, they go and join another young company where they are a good fit. So, how do you see the decision? See, from my perspective, I see that it's about your aspiration. If you are good to be a head of operations for a 100 people company, and suddenly your current company is becoming a 1,000 person company, and your CEO is getting another person who has seen that kind of scale, either you can decide to aspire to become the guy who can eventually handle a 1,000 people organization ops, or you go and join another 10 people company and take the 10 people to another 100, right? So, from my perspective, I think they both are good decisions. It depends upon who you are, what do you enjoy. Have you seen this kind of like both kind of cases for people being successful, or have you seen people who have made those switches eventually lamenting that why did they take that call? They could have stayed on and been more successful.
I think you're right, Krishna. I've seen a lot of these cases, but as you said, both of these can be successful. But if you ask me to pick one, and if you ask me to advise somebody on what is the right thing to do, I would say that stay on and learn from the more senior person that the CEO or the founder has hired. Because I think if you really want to grow in your career, it is not about making those lateral moves and staying at the same level. You can't spend your entire life, managing a team of 20. Just because you worked in your first startup, 20 became 100, but you could not manage, they got a bit senior person. So you don't want to, if you go to another company and manage a team of 20, then in some ways you are not really growing. You're just continuing to manage the same level. So your skill level, your competence level is not growing. And I think it's also a question of attitude. I think people who make these switches are actually showing an attitude which will fail them in the long run, because their attitude is one of they get upset that, why is my startup not trusting me? And they're angry and they quit mostly out of anger. And I think that anger is not the right thing to have. So I think coming back to your point, I think you can move from 20 team, smaller startup and continue to work with them. But I think if in a career is all about building your competence and growing your own personality, your ability. I think that comes with doing new things and managing and learning skill.
Got it. So Hari, what I hear you saying is that you can satisfy your ego by just moving out of maybe joining another company. But if you really want to grow in your career, it's better to learn skills that you don't have. So learn bigger skill of scaling.
Yeah.
One question, another classic dilemma I see a lot of people go through while they have to make decision is that sometimes they are in a good role and they are really enjoying that role, and suddenly they are offered another role, maybe in another company, which might not be as exciting as their current role, but it's exciting in terms of payout. So there's always dilemma. Should I go for higher pay now? Should I continue in my current job, which is exciting? What is your advice on how to draw a balance? I'm sure it cannot be either or. So how do you decide the fine balance?
See, the way I have seen this is that you should never be overpaid. And I think being overpaid, I think, is a wrong strategy in life. If you're paid more than what you deserve, then I think it's inherently wrong. Sometimes you can get away, nothing may happen to you. But it's very likely that someday it will come to bite you, which is that you might be the first person to lose your job. Because a company is always looking at people who are highly paid. Are they delivering results? Are they performing? They are under the radar more than anybody else. So let's assume for a moment that you're looking for a good product person, and you are paying, let's say, 50 lakhs for a good product head leaves, and you find somebody, and that person negotiates and you don't have your choice, you offer this person 100 lakhs, Now, once you offer this person 100 lakhs and this person doesn't deserve that, you are going to keep an eye out on this individual, whether this person is delivering to that compensation or not. So my very broad advice is that never be overpaid, because being overpaid is a wrong thing. And I think if you focus on learning, if you focus on enjoying what you're doing, then I think money will invariably follow you. It might be a little delayed in coming, but it will follow you in a very steady way. So that's my broad advice, in terms of going after money. And I'm also not saying that money is a bad thing and you give up money completely and settle in the Himalayas as a saint. No, I think money is important in life. You have a family to run, you have financial commitments. But I think taking a balanced view of this, not being greedy, I think that is what differentiates. In fact, you know what, I have found that in interviews, especially at senior levels, the way a manager, especially at a very senior level, the way they deal with compensation negotiation is a big giveaway about the character of the person. There was one case where a CXO we rejected because of the way the person negotiated compensation. So I think the way a person negotiates compensation also gives you deep insights into the psychology of a person and tells you whether the person is good to have in your company or not. Sometimes people ask you for, I used to travel business class. I know, but in your company, you're being frugal. Can you make an exception for me? So I think if somebody comes to you with such a request, that's a big, big red flag, because this individual does not even care about your company culture. So I think, first, the way a person deals with compensation is a thing. And broad advice is that it's important to be paid well, but it's important not to be overpaid. Not to be underpaid, not to be overpaid. It's a very fine balance. Don't be greedy is broadly what I would say, because money will come to you if you're competent.
Got it, Hari. I think Hari, you talked about overpaid. How often do you come across candidates who really believe that they are overpaid? How do you decide? Because I think
Yeah.
everybody thinks in the world that they are underpaid.
Yeah, I think, yeah, very few people might think they're overpaid, but I think that some people figure out that they have, you know, um, tricked the system. Or I think some people are really aware. I would say there are few people who are really overpaid are also scared. They are aware that they are overpaid. In fact, when there is a slight downturn, they are the people who are the most worried. So I think moderately overpaid, they don't think they're overpaid, but those who are quite overpaid, I think, recognize and realize it.
Next, I'll
And
take a
therefore,
question.
they behave in all wrong ways. They try to please their boss. They try to suck up to their boss so that they keep their job, they keep the high pay. Once you're overpaid, you begin to do funny things, which are not professional, which don't demonstrate integrity.
So, Hari, next I'll take a question by Sakshi. She's saying that she's planning to be a mother soon and is taking a career break during those time a roadblock in career, and how should she go about planning? So before you answer, I also wanted to give my answer to her. I don't think being a mother is negative at all. I think for a lot of roles it's consistently proven that women do better than men. And on when it comes to taking career break to plan a family, my suggestion to you is that, see, it's not only a mother's responsibility to raise a kid. Father also has an equal responsibility. So if you're taking a break for, let's say, an year to raise your kid, you should also be prepared. Your partner should also be prepared to take another year of career break, right? It's not only for you. You can also take a break. So it doesn't become a break for only one person, another person continues doing. So a lot of people, I've seen a lot of successful women that I have seen come across in my professional career, they have planned that way. That why should only one person take a break? You can plan break together so that both the careers go away parallelly. So, Hari, your advice. What will be your
No,
advice?
I have nothing to add. This is a brilliant response, Krishna. I have nothing to really very good response.
So, I think, Hari, another question that I wanted to ask is that, see, most startup founders and startup companies have mentors. Many of them have some of the investors joining their board, and they come up with a lot of advice, lot of experience of investing and scaling companies. Many startup also get independent directors and get them to advise. So, when it comes to individual, how important is a mentor to them? Like, do you think that everybody should get a mentor? And if yes, how should they go about identifying who they can get as a mentor?
Yeah, so slightly difficult to answer this. I can talk from some personal experience. So I think I have interacted with some people. So, for example, the founder of Daksh, the first startup that I worked for, which is Sanjeev Agarwal, happens to be my mentor in some ways. Very informally, happens to be my mentor. It's not that I go to him for advice ever. We rarely speak. but I think we know each other well. We know what we are good at. We know when the other wants to speak. We trust each other completely. So, for instance, he asked me to join BigBasket, and I didn't ask any questions. I just joined BigBasket. He asked me to if I would be interested in being an advisor at Fundamentum Partnership, which is the stage B C VC fund. I was happy to be part of that. So I think in some ways he's been my mentor, but I don't know if he's a mentor. I don't know if I will ever go and ask him or discuss any of my problems with him. I don't think I've ever discussed any of my problems seriously with him. Although when we meet, we have a chat on a range of things very easily, very freely. But I don't know if I have sought advice. So frankly, from a mentor perspective, I think mentor has to be, if I think is important to have. And I don't know whether it's a mentor or a friend. I think at some point it's important to have somebody who's seen the world a little more than you, and who you can trust completely, who is not going to judge you. And yeah, I think that having a mentor, I think multiple mentors is helpful. It's not that just one individual you can go to for everything. I think for different things you can go to different individuals. So I think you can have multiple sounding boards. Mentor may not be the right word. You can have multiple sounding boards.
Got it. So I think Hari, good advice. One last question that I wanted to take was you spoke about anchors, that you always have anchor. You find your anchors, and then that help you make the decisions in your career.
Mhm.
How, does this anchors change over a period of time? Like, do you have something else maybe attract you in the beginning of your career, then it changes to something else? Is it quite common, or more or less is the same throughout your career?
Yeah, I think very good question. This is, I think there have been always two schools of thought. One school of thought, and I think I come somewhere in between. One school of thought is that you are who you are. Your strengths don't change much over your entire life. You might become a little more refined. You might, brush off some of your weaknesses. You might learn to, round off some of the sharp edges. But your strengths remain what they are essentially, and you are who you are. That's one point of view. The other view is that you can build some other skills as you go along. Say, I'll give you an example. So, for instance, if you are very good, let's say, as a strategic thinker, if you can think very strategically, then there is no point in becoming better and better at that. I think will be able to leverage your strategic thinking if you improve your execution skills a little bit. Because just by being an armchair strategic thinker, people lose respect for you. You can gain respect and create impact of your strategic thinking only if you learn to execute well. So I think if you learn some complementary skills around your core strength, then I think you are able to do completely different things. So I think your core strength may largely remain the same, but if you can build complementary skills. So for example, if you are clear thinker, can you become a better communicator? If you are strategic thinker, can you become better at execution? So if you can just add these complementarities, then you can become an amazing individual as you grow.
Got it. So Hari, I think our time is up, but there are a lot of interesting questions. Maybe we can ask them to just send it separately, and we'll see if we can answer them
Yeah.
offline. So
Okay.
thank you, everyone. I think it was lovely hearing from all of you. I think some of these questions were really, really very interesting. Unfortunately, we couldn't take all the questions, but please do send them. We'll upload this webinar on our page. You can write these questions there also, and we'll try to answer them offline as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you, Hari. It was really,
Thank you.
really
Yes, thank you.
always very
Thanks.
interesting to interact
Yeah.
with you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks. Bye. Bye. Good night.
Okay. Just a reminder to everyone, our next Simplilearn webinar is on next Thursday, September 17th. Leadership webinar, what does it take to be part of a global marketing team today, with Sandeep Menon, the Senior Marketing Director of Google. So please check that out and join us, and we look forward to seeing you then. And you can follow Simplilearn on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And you can also follow Hari on LinkedIn as well. Thanks again.